Hey guys, it's Mrs. Severson. I am going to take you through your first video lesson today. So hopefully you guys have guessed already by the title on the slide. We're going to be talking about the first of our actual continent studies, and we're going to narrow that down to our first country. In my opinion, the best way to start looking at the world is to first look at what is familiar to you. So what I'm going to do is talk to you guys today about the 5 regions of the United States. It's a pretty basic overlook of the general geography, the general culture, and the general lifestyle of each of the 5 regions. So in order for us to talk about regions successfully, we first have to talk about what a region means. So I am going to have you guys actually guess first. So pause the video and guess what a region would mean. So a region itself is actually an area of land that has things in common. So there's 2 different types of regions that we could talk about. First being geographic, meaning that like if an entire area is covered with desert, that would be a desert region. Or if an entire area is covered with mountains, that would be a mountainous region. The other type of region, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is a cultural region. Places that have things in common, like our cultural characteristics of shared history, daily life, meaning they eat the same types of foods, they speak the same types of language, things like that. Okay, so the first region we're going to talk about is called the Northeast region. Okay, the states that are included in this are all the ones that you see on the map to the right, including Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. If you need to pause and take those down for your notes, go ahead and do that now, but I'm going to continue moving on so that we can keep this video as brief as possible. The basic geography of the Northeast region includes a couple of different things, like a lot of rivers and lakes, obviously, because that's where our Great Lakes actually originate. It also is bordered by the Atlantic Ocean, the Appalachian Mountains, and obviously the southeastern states that we're going to talk about next are to the south of this region. The climate is pretty much exactly the same as what we experience here in Wisconsin. It's mostly temperate, so you're going to have those really cold winters with tons of snow. Actually, sometimes they get more snow than we do, if you can believe it. They have really hot summers as well, and they do have those 4 distinct seasons. Something that's kind of notable about this region is that they are actually the smallest in terms of geographical land area of the entire United States, but they have the most densely populated areas. So just a little trivia for you. A little bit about the culture. The religion is mostly Catholic, simply because when they founded these colonies, a lot of people were escaping from England, and they were Catholic because people in England did not like Catholics. So you're going to have a lot of kind of a mishmash of people in this area because this is where our country sort of began. There is a huge population of, for example, like Western Europeans, being Irish and Italian especially. There's also a high population of African Americans due to the Great Migration, which we'll talk about in history, so never fear. It has the greatest diversity of the entire United States in this tiny region. So if you're ever looking for a place that would be really exciting and get to learn about a lot of different cultures, this would be the place to be. As far as daily life, they eat a lot of seafood, basically because they are next to the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. That being said, so you would find a lot of lobster, shrimp, those types of dishes. Cod is very common, things like that. And as I stated before, this is the birthplace of the American Revolution. This is where our country sort of began. This is where people really started fighting for us to be free from England. So there's a lot of rich history for our country in this particular region. Second region that we're going to talk about is called the Southeast region. It has more states, obviously, than the Northeast region. So if you need to pause and go ahead and take these down as well, I'm not going to list them all off for you. And then make sure that you get a good list down for yourself and then move on. Geography of the Southeast region. This is where they have the bottom half of the Appalachian Mountains, which happens to be the oldest mountain range in North America. So it's a very old landscape. So you would find a lot of fossils and things like that here, which is why they have huge coal deposits in these areas, which you should have learned about in science. If you didn't, ask me later. Anyway, so they have tons of rivers and hills, valleys, swamps, things like that, obviously because of the tributaries that flow out of the Appalachian Mountains because we have snow caps there. You're going to actually run into several different climate zones. At the northern part of this region, you're going to have that temperate climate just like we do here, moving down into subtropical in the Carolinas area and then even tropical into Florida. So just kind of keep that in mind. This area is also, heavily bordered by the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, as well as the rivers from the Appalachians. So you're going to have really fertile farmland here. This is kind of our cotton and start of our wheat belt. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at things that would grow here when you're looking into your own projects. So culture of this region, it's very class-centered. If you were born into the upper class of owning a plantation like you see off to the right here, you would really kind of stay in that class. You wouldn't go and kind of socialize too much with people that were not of the landowning class. We'll talk more about classes and social groups and things like that as we move through our units, but just kind of keep that in mind. This region in particular is very centered on things like that. Religion is mostly Baptist and Methodist here, primarily because of, again, who settled here in the beginning of the colonies. The Carolinas as well as Georgia and Florida were original to the country, so just kind of keep that in mind. This is, again, mostly European immigrants like we saw in the Northeast region, as well as a lot of African Americans. Keep in mind that this region did allow slavery prior to the Civil War, so you will have a high African American population because of that. Culture, there's a lot of different things about the South that we've talked about before, but comfort food and soul food and barbecue usually are the biggest staples of the Southeast region as far as food goes. This is also a mostly rural area. There are not a ton of huge cities like you would see in the Northeast region. And as far as language goes, this is like the most distinctive dialect. Remember, we talked about how in the South, if you were surprised by something, you would say something like slap your grandma or something silly like that, which sounds weird to us, but it's a very unique form of English that they speak there. This is also a rich history of music. You can see Elvis down at the bottom here. This is kind of where Elvis made his start. This is also the birthplace of jazz, country music, bluegrass, and the blues as well. So as far as we talked about, this was kind of the area of the country that allowed slavery prior to the Civil War, and we'll talk more about that when we get to history, but just to kind of keep in mind that this area has only recently, and I'm talking like the last 50 years, actually given real civil rights to African Americans in this region. So it's kind of an oddity in our country, because here in the North we're used to a little bit more equality, and things in the South kind of have lagged behind a bit because of that history of slavery. Midwest region, this is where we live, if you hadn't guessed. Wisconsin, if you see, is in the left-hand column. So again, I'm not going to list off all of these, but this is going to be kind of the middle of the road of the United States, and this is the region that we live in. So obviously you know a lot about the geography as already. We do have the Mississippi River, which is the largest river in the United States. We're considered part of the wheat belt because we grow a lot of wheat, a lot of corn. Obviously, we have a lot of cheese products here, but that's not necessarily the case for the entire Midwest. You can see the states highlighted off to the right here. Temperate to subarctic climate, we've talked about this before. We have those 4 distinct seasons. We have very, very cold winters. We have some large cities, but not a ton, just kind of like the Southeast region. As far as culture, we do have a more wide variety of religions, mostly being Protestants and Catholics. We are considered the most polite region, so that's kind of nice. If you go outside the Midwest, you find that people aren't often as friendly. We are mainly meat eaters. We are kind of those meat and potatoes type meals. We also, near Chicago, were the birthplace of the Motown music. So the women on the top photo, you would actually recognize as a Motown group. Well, you probably wouldn't recognize it because they were even before my time, but that's okay. We can talk about all of these fun cultural things later on. As far as the history goes, this has kind of a opposite history of the Southeast region. We have the history of the Underground Railroad, which you guys should have learned about in elementary school. We actually helped fugitive slaves escape from the South to the North. We often, tried to transfer people to Canada so that they could escape slavery. We have a long history of being more friendly with the Native American populations in our region as well. So our fourth region here is the Western region. Again, I'm not going to have an entire list necessarily in this slide of every single little part of this region, but all of the states are listed off to the left, so if you want to take a pause and take those down for your notes, you can do that now. The Western region is, again, kind of a special sort of culture unto itself. The ocean that it's bordered by this time is the Pacific. So remember, the Northeast region was the Atlantic, the West is the Pacific. These guys do have the Rocky Mountains as well, and they are bordered by Canada in the north and the Southeast region to the south. Some of the big physical features, you can take those down as well in your notes. I'm not going to list those off for you, so we can keep moving on. A little bit more about the climate zones. You're going to find a lot of different types of climates simply because it's a very large area. You'll find Mediterranean climates, you'll find tundra, you'll find steppe, you'll find desert. In some areas, you'll find marine west coast if you're looking in like Washington, Oregon area. So very wide variety of climate zones. So if you're kind of interested in experiencing that would be the region that you'd want to go to. They do have some very fertile farmland, mostly on the west coast itself. Otherwise, it's primarily ranching in between. The population density, as far as the western region goes, this is the least dense area of the entire United States. You would find very few people per square mile. We talked about how to calculate that as well. Montana being the least dense in the entire U.S. So just kind of keep that in mind if you're looking at a region that you would like to look further into for your project. They do have high populations of Native Americans, Asian populations as well, obviously, because we're just across the Pacific from Asia. And there's a large Latino majority, especially in California, simply because we're right next to Mexico. Daily life here, like I said, it's very small, very rural towns. Heavy Latino and Native American influence as far as the food. They have a love for country music. Obviously, this is kind of like the cowboy culture, mostly Protestant and Catholic religions. This is considered like the Old West, being the wild, unsettled place, simply because there are a lot of areas that are not really settleable, if that's really a word. Probably not. We'll have to ask Mrs. Shanky. But this is kind of the birthplace of that Old West mentality, that cowboy culture. So it's kind of neat. If you're interested in experiencing that, you could probably still experience that now. That's odd. Our final region that we're going to talk about is definitely small in terms of the number of the actual states. If you notice, I have Hawaii and Alaska in parentheses. These don't actually fit into the Southeast region, and we will talk about those guys separately, but I just wanted to include so that you don't forget those states that are not actually in the continental U.S. So climate zones for the southwestern region, you're going to have mostly arid, meaning very dry, a little bit of temperate and steppe, as well as desert, okay? Then finally, for our daily life as far as southwestern region, this is kind of a Tex-Mex or traditional Latino foods. You're going to look at a lot of tacos, a lot of chili peppers being used, a lot of fresh vegetables, and red meat dishes. English is technically the official language, obviously, for a lot of areas in the United States, but Spanish is used heavily in this area simply